welcome back, Form 2s. This is a little bit different than how we've been doing it since the beginning of the term, but we all know what happened there. So this is the only alternative that I could have found to be able to deliver classes to y'all without the horrible interruptions that some of your classmates very unfortunately would have caused, the inconvenience to everybody. So going forward now, I'm going to pre-record the classes just like this and upload them to YouTube for you all to watch in that hour time period that is set aside for drama every week. So everything on Edmodo remains the same. If you have any questions, anything to ask, then you know where to find me. But now that we're through with that, today we are starting a new topic. We're moving on to festivals of TNT. TNT obviously standing for Trinidad and Tobago. So that's one of the things that we have to cover as drama students, understanding the cultural environment of the country that we live in, and particularly, our interest is in the different forms of performance, the different types of performances that happen at these different festivals. So that means we're looking at festivals from different religions, different ethnicities, different groups of people, different cultures, different parts of the country. And we are going to be starting off with Ram Leela, which I'm hoping that most, if not all of you, have heard of before. But if not, then today is a good day to learn. So what you can do for me at this point in time is just make sure you have your notebooks to take notes. Of course, I'm also going to upload the slides afterwards, minus one thing, which I'll explain to you all. So in order to take the attendance, to make sure that everybody has watched the class for today, there is a secret code in somewhere in the class. You'll see it when it comes up, that you need to put in order to register yourself as attended on Google Forms. So that's the only thing that's not going to be in the slides that I'm putting out there, just to make sure that everybody has looked at the class for today. So yes, let's head right into it. We are going to talk about our very first festival, which is Ram Leela, and then in the coming weeks we'll talk about some other festivals as well. So my approach to doing this, we're going to talk about who, the what, the where, the when, the how, and the why of Ram Leela. So we're going through of course, you all are familiar with this approach to things, and I think it's the most comprehensive way to cover things. So that's how we're going to go ahead with it. Not in this order, but we'll cover all of the bases as we go along. So in Ram Leela, the first thing we're going to address is the what, especially for the people who have never heard about it before, or the people who have, vaguely heard about it, but they're not too sure. The first thing we're going to address is what exactly is Ram Leela. So Ram Leela, well, let's take apart the word. So Ram, or Rama, is a deity in the Hindu faith. So deity being another word for, you can compare it to a god. And he is the seventh avatar or reincarnation of Lord Vishnu. And Leela in Hindi loosely translates to play or theatre. So what Ram Leela is that it's a retelling of the story from the Ramayana, the Ramayana or the Ramayana, which is one of the main Hindu scripture for Hindus in Trinidad and Tobago, that tells the story of Ram or Rama. So this story, so it happens every year. It's a reenactment of the stories from the Ramayana, and it's also the longest running street theater event in the Caribbean. So the actual story, I'm just going to try to more or less put it in a nutshell, is that Ram or Rama married a woman named Sita. And then when he got married to her, he became, well, not when he got married to her, but he became the king, more or less. And then a maid in their house convinced Ram's stepmother, because his father had three wives. So she convinced one of the wives that the wife's son should be the king and not Ram. So the stepmother then got a blessing because she ended up saving her husband's life. And she used this blessing to let her son become the king and force her husband to exile Ram or Rama to the forest for 14 years. So basically, his own father sent him out into the forest and he was not allowed to stay in his home country anymore, and he was not the king anymore. So he went into exile. He went to the forest with his wife and his other brother, one of his brothers. And while he was in exile, all kind of thing happened. And that is kind of the bulk of what Ram Leela is about. All kind of things that happened while he was in exile. One of them is that his brother cut off the nose of a female demon who happened to be the sister of an evil man called Rawan or Ravana. So Ravana took revenge by then kidnapping Sita, who was Ram's wife. And then Ram and his brother go looking for Sita, and another one of the gods called Hanuman rescues her. And in the end, after all his trials and tribulations, with some help, he is able to defeat Rawan, who is the evil guy who kidnaps his wife. And then he's able to return to his kingdom and return to his life. That is just me trying to summarize the entire story in one. But yes, so Ram Leela then is a theater event, you could consider it, that reenacts these stories from this Hindu scripture. So the next thing we want to know about Ram Leela is, when does it happen? So we're just kind of covering the general basis before we go into the really detailed stuff about exactly what Ram Leela entails. So it happens 2 weeks before Diwali every year, and the performances are usually across 10 nights. So that means they'll have one performance every night for 10 nights, and this will be 2 weeks before Diwali. And then the climax is on the final night, which is very exciting. We'll talk about that in more detail later. However, the preparation, and if we're considering this like a production process, the preparation starts much before, because there's a lot of things to prepare. Things like cutting the bamboo to make things that we're going to talk about later, designing things, building things, rehearsing things, sourcing costumes, all of these things are part of the preparation. And the preparation begins before, but Ram Leela itself, the 10 days, the 10 major days, usually falls within 2 weeks, 2 weeks before Diwali. And if we think about this year, Diwali is a Saturday. I think it might be the first Saturday in November. I think that's wrong. But so of course COVID, so they don't have Ram Leela this year, but it usually would have been 2 weeks before Diwali. Yes. Oh, right. One thing that I was supposed to mention about the preparation is that it must start before Pitru Pash or Pitru Pash, which is, I'm sorry if I can't pronounce it properly, but it's basically a time in the Hindi calendar where they practice ancestral worship, and they pay homage to their ancestors. So all preparation for Ram Leela must take place before that. So the next thing we want to know is, where does it happen? Of course, we're talking about festivals in TNT, so we know it's in Trinidad, but where exactly does Ram Leela take place? So it's traditionally in rural communities, meaning not in the city, but more kind of, on the outskirts of the city, more in what you might call in inverted commas bush, but also not necessarily. And it's usually in communities that traditionally have a large percentage of East Indian people living there. And it's in theater terms, which we would have learned when we were in Form 1, it's in an arena space, which means that the stage, as you'd call it, the playing area, the performance area, is one big circle where they perform in a 360-degree profile. So it's also called theatre in the round, as we should know, because we learned that in Form 1. And it's also outdoor, which we learned about as well, open air. And it's usually held in large savannas and public parks. And this is kind of a reason why it's held, part of the reason why it continues to be held in rural communities, because in cities, it's more crowded. You have buildings a lot closer together. You don't have wide open spaces as much. But in rural areas, you're more likely to have open spaces, and you're also more likely to have a strong community bond as opposed to people who live in the city. Um, and of course, well, we'll go into this in a little bit more detail later, but these were communities where East Indian people would have settled initially after indentureship when they first came to Trinidad many, many, many years ago. So some places, some popular locations for RAMLEELA are Palmy's Park, Matilda, Enterprise, Felicity, and Hindu secondary schools have now started doing it as well. Some of these places have actually been in operation for more than 100 years. Matilda RAMLEELA has been in operation for more than 100 years. So that just goes to show how much strong heritage is behind something like this. So the next thing we want to know is who celebrates RAMLEELA. So it is predominantly Indo-Trinidadians of Hindu faith, but all races and all religions are allowed to practice. Of course, it is a Hindu tradition, so you're going to find mostly Hindu people practicing it, but it's not limited, it's not restricted to Hindu people alone or East Indian people alone either. There is a very big emphasis on community. So even if people don't live in the community anymore, sometimes they come back into the community for rehearsals and for preparation for RAMLEELA. So you have a lot of community involvement and cooperation between the actors, the dancers, designers, artisans, people to make costumes. It's a lot of cooperation between people in the community. It's also all ages. So there are some roles that are traditionally played by children. You will more than likely always find children taking part in RAMLEELA, as in actually performing in it. And then sometimes the roles are actually passed down through generations. So it might be that you have somebody whose grandfather played Ram, and then the grandfather's son will play Ram when he gets old enough, and then his son will play Ram when he gets old enough, and then it goes down the line. It does not always work like this, but it has been known to happen in RAMLEELA. So moving along, the next thing, the big topic, this is the big chunk of it, asking how exactly does this festival of RAMLEELA take place? How is it celebrated? What's the deal with it? I forget to think how. Right. So, how did RAMLEELA end up in the Caribbean? Of course, when we had indentureship after the period of plantation slavery, we had a lot of, more than, I can't remember the number, but it was a lot of people coming directly from India to work in the Caribbean. And most of them would have come between Guyana and Trinidad. So that is how RAMLEELA ended up here. So some of the things have been preserved from the original Indian tradition, but there are a lot of things about RAMLEELA that are very unique and very specific to Trinidad and Tobago. And the the reasoning, as in the fact that it was brought through indentureship, kind of also explains why it's generally held in rural settings. Because remember, after indentureship, our East Indian ancestors would have been most times given land in Trinidad, and a lot of times it would have been in rural areas, or they would have just stayed in the areas where the plantations that they worked on were. Yeah, so some of the things have been kept and some of the things have really been innovated, because that's one thing Caribbean people are really good at, innovating and making things our own. Another thing about the how it's performed. So the original scriptures from the Ramayana are used, and then you also have where they mix in some contemporary messages and also the local dialect. So they might bring in issues like pollution or crime or mental health and things that are really relevant to us in the here and now. They would incorporate that into the performance as well, even though it's telling a story that happened maybe thousands of years ago. So, before we get into talking about the performance itself, during the preparation and during the 10-day performance process as well, everybody who takes part in Ram Leela is on a strict fast where they don't have meat, they don't have alcohol, and sometimes for the 10 days you'll find people who won't eat any salt either. So it's just to show that this is a very sacred practice. It's not just a performance, it's not just a sing and dance. And you'll find people, fasting and offering prayers in the time that they are preparing for this performance. So, and then over the course of the 10 nights, now we're talking about the performance itself. The story is presented by a narrator. The narrator is very, very, very important in Ram Leela. And then you have the actors and the dancers providing support. Sometimes you have, well, we'll talk about that in a second. But also, every single performance is different. It just depends on the group that is putting it on. So if you think about the nativity play or the Good Friday celebrations, just drawing Christian examples here now. Every time it's done different, and everywhere it's done differently. And that's just because of whoever was in charge of it. So it's more or less the same with Ram Leela. So while the story remains the same, just like with the nativity story, the presentation is different depending on who is putting it on. Moving along with how. Wow, I did not put my transitions in this slide. But one thing that to mention is that there are more or less two types of Ram Leela. These are not strict categories, but there's a more traditional kind, which would be closer to how it was originally practiced. So they'll have everything live music, and it's constant tassa. They'd have miming, they'd have Indian dance, because these people probably wouldn't be too concerned with the performance element so much of it, And then there's stage Ram Leela, which is more elaborate, and they have more elaborate stagecraft. So they'll have things like lighting and special effects and sound systems, and they might even have actors who have been trained rather than just community members. Rather than just Indian dance, they might have different styles of dance, things like that. But the common thing between all types of Ram Leela is that there's a narrator who tells the story while the actors demonstrate it. And on the 10th night, as I was telling you, the exciting part is that, so they build in their preparation process, probably the longest part about the preparation process for Ram Leela is that they build a huge effigy, which is another word for basically a depiction, a big doll, I guess you could, for lack of a better word, of the evil Ravan. So it might be, as it's very tall. I can't remember the number right now, but I think I remember hearing something about 30 feet, might be more. But each effigy will, differ in height, but they are very, very, very tall. And in the next slide, I'm going to show you another thing about how it's celebrated is that the 21 days at least, before, including and also before the 10 days of performance, for those days everybody fasts as well, all 21 days for that entire month leading up to Ram Leela. So I'm just going to move on to show you these effigies, that's Effigy, of Rawan. This one I found was, and these are all in Trinidad, this I found was particularly amazing. And it's really tall. I am very bad with numbers, so I don't know, what numbers represent and stuff, but it's plenty feet, real tall, real tall. Look, it's even taller than where you see the lights, the telephone wires. That's how tall it is by a good bit. This is another one, because Rawan is described as having 10 heads and probably a lot of arms as well. I don't know about that part, but I know for sure he has 10 heads or something like that. And this is just a picture to show you exactly how huge it is, because that's a truck. That's like a 40-foot truck. And Rawan is being transported to the Ram Leela grounds on that truck. That just shows you how huge it is. And of course, the design and everything of the Rawan will depend on the community and whoever is in charge. So as I said, to depict Ram defeating Rawan, they burn the effigy on the final night, like this, like that, and like this. So they set it on fire and the entire thing burns, and it's supposed to symbolize good winning over evil. So this is the part where I present the attendance code for this week. It is TASA. So when you go onto the Google form to register your attendance, the code is TASA. Type it just like this with a capital T, A-S-S-A, TASA. That's the code for this week. Yeah, that's that on that. So just moving on to our very last point, and it's why would we celebrate Ram Leela? Why would people put this on? And what's the benefit of it to the people who put it on and the people who are watching? So first and foremost, to preserve the tradition and to keep it alive for the generations to come. Remember, I mentioned that some of these Ram Leela groups have been operating for more than 100 years. So these are attempts to hold on to the culture and keep it alive so that the younger people will know what it's about and continue to carry it on in the years to come. There's also, of course, the purpose to teach people, whether it's people who are of the Hindu faith or people who are not, about the story and the lessons that you can learn from the Ramayana. So yes, in a sense, it's building your awareness of that, and you think about it in the same way as if we had plays reenacting things from the Bible, the prodigal son, the nativity, all these things. Think about it like that, and that is one of the benefits of, and one of the purposes of putting on something like Ram Leela. Also, to build community and build spirituality. Of course, we spoke about, the fact that people go into fasting when they are preparing for this. So that's building their spirituality, but also community, because there's such a group, a big team of people that need to be behind such a production. If you think about making an effigy, that's more than 30 feet tall, that definitely requires a lot of people. Everything requires a lot of cooperation. It requires people to pool money together, people to act together, to conceptualize all of these things. So of course it's a nice community building exercise, because the people in the community are able to interact with each other in creating something nice. Why is this here? That's in the wrong slide. That's my fault. That was supposed to be somewhere else. But and the final one of the reasons is to entertain, of course. Even if I've seen Ram Leela, you know, 10 times before, you go back to be entertained in the same way as it would be for any performance, any show. Part of it is also, part of the reason for putting it on is also to entertain and engage the audience. Excuse me. Right, great. So that's it for Ram Leela today. More than likely, there's going to be a quiz on Edmodo at a certain point in time to kind of test your knowledge of what we covered in these slides today. So look out for that as well. And you can spend the rest of this hour, the rest of this class time, doing things like going on the internet, looking at videos of Ram Leela, doing your own independent research, making sure that all of your notes encompass everything that we would have covered in class today. Looking at videos of Ram Leela and just and also doing the quiz, right? So thank you very much for paying attention, and I look forward to speaking with you all soon. We may or may not ever end up back on Zoom, which is very unfortunate because I was really enjoying having class with you all despite all the disruptions. But this is our solution for now. So over and out. Don't forget to do the quiz. Don't forget to do your own independent research. Be an active student, and God bless.